She pepper sprayed my newborn baby, 3 weeks old, in the face. Even saying those words still makes my chest tighten. I can still hear the sound that followed, the kind of scream you never forget. Not the soft, hungry cry of a baby, not the sleepy whimper of discomfort. This was something primal, pure agony bursting from a tiny throat that barely understood what breathing was. My daughter Lily was thrashing in her stroller, her face red and glistening, her little fist shaking as if trying to fight back against the burning air itself. Moments earlier, everything had been perfect. The kind of Saturday morning you dream about after months of sleepless nights. My wife Emma and I had finally decided to take Lily for her first real walk around our neighborhood, Maple Ridge Estates. The sun was soft, the air smelled of cut grass and blooming jasmine, and for the first time since the birth we both felt human again. I'd been standing just a few feet away, camera in hand, ready to capture that tiny wrinkled miracle bundled in pink blankets. Emma had paused to adjust Lily's cover, humming softly, her hair catching the sunlight. The stroller was on the sidewalk. Yes, but we were right there. We weren't blocking anyone. We were simply parents caught in a beautiful, ordinary moment. Then she appeared. Margaret Sullivan, 62 years old, retired school principal, president of our HOA, and self-appointed dictator of Maple Ridge Estates. She moved like a drill sergeant patrolling her turf, her gray hair pulled into a bun so tight it looked painful. Every resident knew that voice before they saw her. Sharp, nasal, and always filled with authority. "Move that stroller," she barked, marching toward us with that permanent scowl carved into her face. "You're blocking the sidewalk. That's a violation of HOA Rule 47, Section 3. Emma turned, confused but polite. "We're just taking a picture. We'll move in a second." "The rules say no obstructions on sidewalks," Margaret snapped. "You people think you're special? Think having a baby means the rules don't apply to you?" I tried to stay calm, hands raised slightly, my voice even. "Mrs. Sullivan, we're literally right here. We're not blocking anyone. Just give us a moment." "I don't give moments," she hissed. "I give citations." She yanked out her phone, taking photos of our stroller like it was a crime scene. "That's a $500 fine for sidewalk obstruction." Emma blinked, incredulous. "500? For standing here with our newborn?" Margaret's jaw tightened, that blue vein pulsing at her temple. "Should have thought about that before you broke the rules." That's when Lily made a soft, fussy noise, the kind any parent would recognize. Not even a real cry, just a murmur, a little protest against the sun or the movement. But Margaret turned, her face twisting in disgust. "And that noise, disturbing the peace, that's another violation." "She's a baby," I said, my patience slipping. "Babies cry. That's not a violation of anything." "In Maple Ridge Estates it is," she said sharply. "I will not have screaming children disrupting our peaceful community." Emma bent down to pick Lily up. "We're leaving," she said, her voice trembling. "We're going home right now." And then it happened. Margaret reached into her purse, and before I could even process it, she pulled out a canister of pepper spray. No hesitation, no warning, just a hiss and a burst of orange mist. I saw the cloud hit my daughter's face. I saw her tiny body jerk back in shock. Then came that scream, the one that still wakes me up at night. Emma lunged forward, scooping Lily into her arms, her voice raw with panic. "What did you do?" she cried. "You sprayed my baby." Margaret didn't flinch. She didn't apologize. She actually smiled. "Maybe that'll teach you to follow the rules," she said coldly. "Control your child and move your stroller." Then she turned and walked away, her heels clicking against the pavement like a punctuation mark of cruelty. For a moment, time stopped. I remember the smell. Sharp, chemical, like burning metal. Lily's face was already turning bright red, her eyes squeezed shut, her mouth open in silent agony. Emma was screaming her name, trying to wipe her face, making it worse. My mind couldn't catch up. It was like my body and my brain weren't connected anymore. Then instinct kicked in. I shouted, "Call 911." My voice cracked as I fumbled for my phone, my hand shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. My baby, my newborn, she's been pepper sprayed. She's not breathing right. Lily's cries were turning faint now, her breaths ragged and shallow. Emma's voice broke into sobs. Michael, she can't breathe. She's turning blue. And she was. Our 3-week-old daughter's lips were changing color, a pale blue creeping across her tiny mouth. Her chest was moving too fast, too shallow. My heart felt like it was being crushed inside my ribs. The world spun around us, neighbors running, voices shouting, someone grabbing a hose, another bringing water. I heard everything but understood nothing. My focus was locked on Lily, her little body going limp in Emma's trembling hands. Stay with us, baby, I whispered, tears burning down my face. Please, Lily, stay with us. Sirens echoed in the distance, faint but growing. For 6 eternal minutes we stood there, parents begging the universe to spare their child, while the woman who did it disappeared down the street without looking back. And as Lily's cries faded into shallow gasps, one truth cut through the chaos like a blade. Margaret Sullivan had no idea who I was. She had no idea that the man she'd just pushed past wasn't just a father. He was a sitting session court judge. And I was about to use every ounce of power. I had to make her pay. The next few seconds were pure chaos. No order, no logic, no time to think, just panic. Emma was screaming Lily's name over and over, rocking her in her arms, her voice cracking into something inhuman. Our baby's tiny face was red and swelling, her eyelids clamped shut, her breathing ragged like every gasp scraped against fire. I could still smell the pepper spray in the air, an acrid metallic sting that made my own eyes water. But I didn't care about the pain. I couldn't. All I could see was my daughter's little chest struggling, rising too fast, then too slow, like her lungs couldn't decide whether to fight or give up. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers slick with sweat. I could barely see the screen through the blur of tears. 911? Please, I shouted, my voice cracking as I pressed the call button. The operator's voice was calm, too calm. 911, what's your emergency? My baby, my 3-week-old baby, she's been pepper sprayed. She's not breathing right. I gasped. She's turning blue. Please send an ambulance to Maple Ridge Estates, 247 Willow Lane. Stay on the line, the dispatcher said, but her voice felt 1,000 miles away. I could barely hear her over Emma's sobs, the rising noise of neighbors running toward us, the hammering of my own pulse. Is the baby conscious? She's gasping, I said, my throat burning. She can't breathe. Please hurry. Someone from across the street came rushing over with a bottle of water, shouting, Rinse her face, rinse it off. But I'd spent enough years on the bench to know that water makes pepper spray worse. It spreads the capsaicin. I threw up my hand. No, don't touch her face. Emma was shaking uncontrollably, her hair sticking to her wet cheeks, her voice trembling. Michael, she's not breathing right. She's not. Her sentence broke into sobs. I could see Lily's little lips turning darker, her tiny hands curling inward. My stomach dropped into a cold void. There's no training for that kind of terror. No title, no degree, no bench in the world prepares you for watching your child fade in your arms. The operator kept talking, her voice a lifeline in the chaos. Help is on the way. Stay calm. Keep her airway open. Don't try to wash her face. I dropped the phone to speaker mode, crouching beside Emma, trying to remember every emergency protocol I'd ever read. Tilt her head back. Just a little, I said, my voice trembling. Don't touch her eyes. Just breathe, baby. Please breathe. Lily's cries had faded now, replaced by tiny wet gasps, each one weaker than the last. Her little body was twitching, and the sight nearly broke me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to chase Margaret Sullivan down and make her feel every ounce of this pain. But rage couldn't save my daughter. Only help could. And then in the distance, sirens. Faint at first, like a whisper of hope, cutting through the noise. Then louder, closer. The neighbors parted as red and blue lights spilled across the quiet suburban street. The ambulance roared to a stop in front of our house, and 2 paramedics jumped out, their calmness almost terrifying in its contrast to our panic. One look at Lily, and the older medic's face went pale. "Pepper spray?" he asked sharply. I nodded, my voice caught in my throat. 3 weeks old, I managed. His partner was already unrolling gear, grabbing a small oxygen tank, fumbling for the smallest mask they had. But even that looked enormous against her face. They worked fast, one holding her head steady, the other trying to clear her airway with a gentle suction tube. "Severe respiratory distress," the older medic muttered, his voice grim. "We need to move, now." Emma refused to let go, sobbing as they pried Lily gently from her arms to place her on a stretcher. Her tiny body looked swallowed by the blankets, her face still red and glistening. The medic adjusted the oxygen mask, trying to fit it to her features. "We'll stabilize her on the way," he said, though his voice betrayed doubt. I followed them to the ambulance, my mind numb, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. The world felt like it was spinning around me. Too bright, too loud. The smell of chemicals still in my nose, the echo of sirens bouncing off the houses. I climbed into the front seat of our car, following behind as the ambulance pulled away, the sound of the siren tearing through the morning air. Through the back window I saw Emma inside the ambulance, holding Lily's tiny hand as the medics worked around her. Her body wasn't moving much now. Just the faint rise and fall of her chest under the oxygen mask. As the doors slammed shut and the siren screamed louder, I caught one last glimpse of my baby through the glass. Her face still red, her lips pale, and in that moment, the world went silent, because I realized I might be watching my daughter die. The emergency room doors slammed open as the paramedics rushed Lily inside, their voices cutting through the fluorescent chaos. The smell of antiseptic hit me like a wall, mixing with the faint, acrid residue of pepper spray still clinging to my clothes. I stumbled behind them, half running, half falling through the hallways as nurses called codes and wheeled my daughter toward the ICU. Her tiny body looked impossibly small beneath the mountain of tubes and hands trying to save her. Emma clung to my arm, crying so hard she could barely breathe. A doctor in blue scrubs stepped into our path, mid-40s, calm eyes, a badge that read Dr. Patel, Pediatric Critical Care. "You're the parents?" he asked quickly. I nodded, words catching in my throat. "Your daughter's in respiratory distress," he said, already motioning for a nurse to grab something from a cart. "Pepper spray causes severe chemical irritation. On an infant, that's life-threatening. We're going to stabilize her airway and monitor her oxygen levels. You'll need to wait here." Emma shook her head violently. "No, please, I can't leave her. I need to be with her." "I understand," he said gently, "but right now, she needs us. The next few minutes are critical." They rushed through swinging doors that locked behind them, leaving us in a sterile waiting area. The silence was unbearable. The faint beeps of machines somewhere beyond that wall were like nails in my chest. Emma was shaking uncontrollably beside me, her face buried in her hands. "She's just a baby," she whispered through her sobs. 3 weeks old, Michael. What kind of monster does that to a baby?" I wanted to answer. I wanted to comfort her. But I couldn't find words. My mind was stuck on the image of Margaret's face, smug, satisfied, walking away while my daughter screamed. That smile, that indifference. After what felt like hours but was probably 20 minutes, Dr. Patel returned, his gloves off now, his expression heavy but measured. "She's stable," he said softly, "but the next 24 hours are critical." Emma clutched my arm, her knuckles white. "Is she going to be okay?" Dr. Patel hesitated. The pepper spray caused chemical burns to her eyes, face, and respiratory tract. Her airways are swollen, which is why she had trouble breathing. We've managed to reduce the inflammation and get her oxygen levels back up, but we're not out of danger yet. Her eyes! Emma's voice broke. She kept them closed the whole time. Will she be blind? He exhaled, the kind of sigh that carried years of difficult conversations. We won't know the full extent of the ocular damage until the swelling subsides. There's scarring, but we're hoping it's superficial. Right now, our focus is keeping her breathing stable. Emma collapsed into the nearest chair, sobbing into her hands. She's 3 weeks old, she kept repeating. 3 weeks. I stood still, staring at the floor. The tile beneath my shoes looked warped, like the world itself was bending under the weight of what had just happened. Inside me, something was breaking apart, but not into panic this time. Into something sharper. Colder. I looked up at Dr. Patel. "You'll do everything you can," I said. My voice didn't sound like mine anymore. It was lower, controlled. "Money, specialists, whatever you need. It doesn't matter. Just save her." He nodded firmly. "We're doing everything possible. She's a fighter. Don't lose hope." But as he walked away, hope wasn't what I was feeling. It was something else. Something that felt like the opposite of helplessness. I turned to Emma, who was trembling beside me, and placed a hand on her shoulder. "I promise you," I said quietly, my voice steady now. "She's not getting away with this." Emma looked up through her tears, confused. "Michael." I met her eyes, every trace of softness gone. "Margaret Sullivan thinks she can hide behind her HOA badge, behind her title. She thinks she attacked an ordinary family. She doesn't know who I am." "Michael, what are you saying?" "I'm Judge Michael Rhodes," I said, each word deliberate, unflinching, "and she has no idea who she just assaulted." The words hung in the sterile air, cold and final. I wasn't just a father anymore. Not tonight. Not after this. Something inside me had shifted. I had spent years on the bench watching people twist the law to justify cruelty. Not this time. Not with her. I turned toward the ICU door, the faint hum of machines echoing through the glass. My baby was fighting for her life because a woman believed that rules mattered more than humanity. And I was going to make sure that belief destroyed her. The door opened suddenly, breaking my thoughts. A female detective stepped inside, sharp suit, tired eyes. She looked at me, recognition flashing across her face. "Judge Rhodes," she said, her voice firm. "I'm Detective Sarah Chin. I heard what happened." She paused, her jaw tightening. "We've arrested her." Detective Sarah Chin's presence in that cold ICU waiting room brought a strange mix of familiarity and gravity. I'd seen her countless times in my courtroom. Sharp, methodical, one of the best investigators in the county. But seeing her there, in person, after what had just happened, was different. She wasn't here as a witness in someone else's case. She was here for mine. Her usual calm was still there, but I could see the anger flickering behind her eyes when she looked at Emma, who was still trembling beside me. "Judge Rhodes," she said quietly, nodding in respect. "I wish we were meeting under different circumstances." I nodded back, unable to mask the strain in my voice. "So do I." She opened a small notepad, her tone professional but softer than usual. "I need to take your full statement. From the beginning. Every detail matters." I took a deep breath. The sterile smell of antiseptic clung to everything, making the air thick. "It started around 9 this morning," I began. "We were just walking Lily in her stroller outside our townhouse. My wife stopped to fix the blanket. That's when Margaret Sullivan approached us." Her pen stopped mid-motion. "The HOA president?" "Yes," I said flatly. She started shouting about sidewalk obstruction. HOA Rule 47, Section 3. Took pictures, threatened a $500 fine. We tried to explain, but she wouldn't listen. I could hear my own heartbeat as I spoke. Then she said Lily's crying was disturbing the peace. Emma tried to leave, but Margaret reached into her purse and pulled out pepper spray. She sprayed it directly into my daughter's face from 2 feet away. Detective Chin's eyes darkened. "Your baby?" "My baby," I said. 3 weeks old." For a long moment she said nothing. The only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioner and Emma's muffled sobs. Then she straightened. "We've already taken her into custody," she said. "Patrol units picked her up at her home 15 minutes ago." She's being processed as we speak. I exhaled, the first small flicker of relief breaking through the fog of rage. Good. Then charge her. She looked up from her notepad. With what exactly? I didn't hesitate. Aggravated assault on a minor. Child endangerment. Assault with a chemical weapon. And if there's any room for interpretation, stack every single applicable count. Her eyebrows rose slightly, but there was a hint of admiration in her tone. You're not wasting any time, are you? This wasn't an accident, I said. She meant to hurt us. She meant to hurt Lily. Chin nodded, flipping a page. We're already building the evidence. One of your neighbors has a ring camera that caught part of the altercation. I've got a tech team retrieving the footage. If the spray itself is visible, that's direct evidence of intent. Find everything, I said. Witnesses, audio, texts, anything that shows what she planned. And she did. Within hours, the first pieces of the puzzle started falling into place. The footage was grainy, but clear enough. Margaret striding up the sidewalk, phone in one hand, pepper spray in the other. You could hear her voice on the audio, sharp and cold. Maybe that'll teach you to follow the rules. But that wasn't the only evidence. Her phone records revealed text messages she'd sent that very morning to her daughter. Dealing with those new parents today. Baby or not, nobody blocks my sidewalks. Time to show them who's in charge. Premeditation. Clear as day. She hadn't just lost her temper. She'd armed herself for confrontation. Neighbors began coming forward too. The stories poured in like floodwater, each one painting a clearer picture of who Margaret Sullivan really was. One man said she'd threatened to pepper spray his dog because it barked near the HOA park. A teenage boy admitted she'd chased him off his skateboard, yelling she'd teach him respect if he came back. Another neighbor described how she carried that same canister every morning, patrolling like a prison warden, claiming it was for enforcement. She'd ruled Maple Ridge Estates like a petty dictator, her HOA badge her crown, and now she'd taken it too far. By nightfall, I was sitting in my car outside the hospital, scrolling through my email as Detective Chin sent over updates. The words on the screen were sterile, procedural, but every one of them felt like justice breathing to life. Suspect in custody, formal charges pending review, evidence strong. Then, hours later, I received the final piece. Chin's body cam footage from the arrest. It showed Margaret on her front porch, arms crossed, face twisted in annoyance rather than fear. You pepper sprayed a 3-week-old infant, Chin told her, voice tight with disgust. Margaret didn't flinch. I pepper sprayed a violation, she said coldly. Chin's voice sharpened. You attacked a baby. The fact that it was a baby, Margaret snapped, is irrelevant. Rules exist for a reason. People need to follow them, or face consequences. I watched the footage 3 times, each replay feeding the same cold, precise fury that had taken root inside me since the hospital. Because at that moment, it was no longer just about my daughter's pain. It was about every person she'd ever bullied, every ounce of power she'd ever abused, every cruel rule she'd ever used as a weapon. And I was going to make sure that, for the first time in her life, Margaret Sullivan would learn what real consequences felt like. Detective Sarah Chin was as relentless as I'd ever seen her. Over the next 48 hours, while Emma and I sat helpless beside Lily's hospital bed, she built a case so airtight it could choke on its own precision. Every lead, every witness, every pixel of video was cataloged and cross-referenced. I'd spent my life in courtrooms watching prosecutors and detectives work, but never had I seen justice take shape with such urgency. Because this time, it wasn't about a defendant. It was about a baby. My baby. Lily lay in her tiny ICU crib, tubes winding around her like vines. Her skin had begun to lose its angry red hue, though patches of it still looked raw. The steady beeping of monitors was both comforting and torturous. It meant she was alive, but it also meant she wasn't out of danger. Every few hours, Dr. Patel would come in to check her vitals, his voice calm and deliberate. She's healing, he'd say, but her respiratory system is fragile. The inflammation is subsiding, but we need to monitor for scarring. Emma never left Lily's side. She sat in the same chair, her hair pulled back, her eyes hollow from sleeplessness. Sometimes she'd hum softly, the same lullaby she used to sing when Lily was still in her belly. I'd stand at the window, phone in hand, talking to Chin, reviewing case updates between every breath of my daughter's recovery. By the third day, the case had evolved into something far bigger than an assault. Neighbors began calling the station, each story revealing another layer of Margaret Sullivan's long-standing tyranny. A woman named Carla admitted Margaret had once threatened to fine her for letting her toddler draw chalk flowers on the driveway. She said it degraded community standards. Carla told Chin. Another neighbor described how Margaret carried pepper spray on her morning patrols, waving it like a badge of authority. She said people listen better when they know you mean business. Even the HOA board started turning on her. One of the board members, a meek accountant named Frank Larson, confessed to Chin that they'd been afraid of her for years. She'd bully us into backing her citations, he said. If we didn't, she'd threaten to report us for negligence. Nobody wanted to cross her. It was all beginning to unravel. The perfect facade of Maple Ridge Estates, the manicured lawns, the white fences, the spotless sidewalks, was cracking to reveal the rot beneath. Margaret had ruled by intimidation, disguising cruelty as order, and now the entire neighborhood was watching her empire collapse. Meanwhile, Lily's condition was shifting too. Tiny signs of improvement mixed with devastating new revelations. Dr. Patel came in on the morning of the fourth day, his voice gentle but serious. She's stable enough to move out of critical observation soon, he said. But there's something you need to know. Emma straightened, gripping my arm. He took a breath. The pepper spray caused corneal scarring. It's healing, but she'll likely have long-term vision issues. She may need corrective surgery when she's older. Will she be blind? Emma asked, her voice trembling. Dr. Patel shook his head. No, not blind. She'll see, but maybe not perfectly. Her vision will always be different. Emma's tears fell silently. I stood there motionless, absorbing every word. Different, I repeated softly. She'll always see differently. Dr. Patel placed a hand on my shoulder. She's a fighter. She'll adapt, but her recovery will take time. I nodded, my mind already shifting gears from grief to purpose. I'd seen people justify violence before, but never like this. Never against a child. That night, I reviewed federal law under the dim hospital light. Title 18, Section 113 of the U.S. Code, assault with a dangerous weapon, classifies pepper spray as a chemical agent when used offensively. Its misuse against a minor qualifies as felony assault under federal law, carrying penalties of up to 10 years per count. Margaret wouldn't just face local charges. She'd face federal ones too. Chin's messages pinged in one after another. Updates, statements, and then the goldmine. Margaret's interrogation footage. I hesitated before playing it, unsure whether I wanted to see her face again. But I did. She sat across from Detective Chin in the small, gray interview room, her hands folded neatly on the table, like she was at a PTA meeting. Her expression was cold, almost bored. Chin's voice was calm, but edged with fury. Mrs. Sullivan, several witnesses saw you spray an infant. There's video evidence. Do you have anything to say for yourself? Margaret tilted her head, lips curling into that familiar, self-satisfied smirk. Rules are rules, she said simply. Chin leaned forward. You attacked a 3-week-old baby. Margaret's voice didn't waver. A violation is a violation. I was maintaining order. If people don't follow community standards, there are consequences. I paused the video there, staring at her frozen face. The arrogance, the utter absence of remorse. For her, this wasn't an assault. It was enforcement. In her twisted world, authority justified everything. But now, the law was going to show her what real authority looked like. Lily came home 3 weeks after the attack. The doctors called it a miracle, but the word didn't feel right. Miracles shouldn't come wrapped in bandages and ointment. Her tiny face was healing, the raw redness fading into pale patches of scar tissue. But she wasn't the same. None of us were. Our house, once a place of warmth and laughter, now carried the constant tension of what-ifs. Every sound felt amplified, every quiet moment suspicious. The first night back, Emma tried to rock Lily to sleep in her arms. She hummed the lullaby she'd sung since pregnancy, but Lily flinched at the faint creak of the rocking chair. When the neighbor's car door slammed outside, she startled so violently that her oxygen monitor beeped in panic. She screamed until her tiny lungs gave out, until her body trembled from exhaustion. We'd turn on the lights, and she'd cry harder. The brightness made her squint, made her rub her eyes as if the memory of the burning still lived behind her eyelids. So we kept the curtains drawn most of the day, the house bathed in muted amber light. The sound of footsteps, the hum of the vacuum, even a phone vibrating, it all triggered the same desperate crying. It wasn't just fear. It was something deeper, something primal. A week later, Dr. Patel referred us to a pediatric trauma specialist. Even at her age, he said, her brain can form associations. Pain, sound, light, it all connects. She's still processing the trauma. The psychologist, a calm woman named Dr. Green, sat across from us in her softly lit office, explaining what I never imagined could exist in an infant. Post-traumatic stress can begin very early, she said. Her mind can't form memories the way adults do, but her body remembers the fear. That's why she startles so easily. She's living in a world that feels unsafe. Emma looked at her like she'd been punched. But she's just a baby, she whispered. She's supposed to feel safe. Dr. Green nodded gently. That's why therapy will focus on sensory reassurance, touch, sound, and consistency. She needs to relearn that the world won't hurt her again. I looked at Lily in her carrier beside us, sleeping restlessly, her fists twitching in her sleep. Even her dreams weren't peaceful. At home that night, Emma sat on the couch holding Lily, staring into nothing. Her voice was barely a whisper. I should have protected her. I should have moved the stroller sooner. I turned toward her, feeling that familiar ache in my chest. Emma, I said quietly, this isn't your fault. She shook her head. I froze. I didn't think she'd actually do it. I should have stood in front of Lily. I should have... Stop, I said, my voice firmer now. You did everything right. You're her mother, not a soldier. You couldn't have known that woman was carrying a weapon. Emma looked up at me, her eyes red. Then who protects her now, Michael? Who keeps her safe? I do, I said, the words like steel. I'll protect her now, through justice. And I meant it. The next morning, a thick envelope arrived by courier. Inside was the first official court summons, State versus Margaret Sullivan. Charges: aggravated assault on a minor, assault with a chemical weapon, child endangerment. It was happening. 2 days later, Margaret appeared before the judge for arraignment. I wasn't allowed to sit on the bench, of course, but I was there in the back row, my hands folded tightly in my lap. She stood in her neat gray blazer, her chin lifted as if she were being inconvenienced, not tried. How does your client plead? The judge asked. Not guilty, Your Honor, her attorney Richard Morrison replied smoothly. Emma's hand gripped mine. Not guilty, as if spraying an infant's face was a misunderstanding, as if it were nothing more than a technical violation of HOA protocol. When the hearing ended, the courtroom buzzed with reporters. Cameras flashed. The story had spread like wildfire. HOA president pepper sprays newborn. Every headline carried a tone of disbelief, of outrage. News vans began parking outside Maple Ridge Estates. Residents who once obeyed Margaret's every order now spoke against her. Parents, dog owners, even retirees she'd bullied for years were stepping forward. The community that once feared her was now uniting against her. The HOA board scrambled to issue a statement, something sanitized and hollow about deep regret and temporary suspension of duties. But it was too late. Margaret Sullivan had become a national symbol of HOA madness. A woman so obsessed with control she'd blinded a baby to prove a point. At home, I watched the coverage on mute, the images flickering against Lily's sleeping face. The same woman who had once terrified our neighborhood was now plastered across every news screen in the country. The weight of it all pressed down on me as I closed my laptop. This wasn't just my fight anymore. It was everyone's who'd ever been silenced, fined, or threatened by someone drunk on authority. The morning of the first hearing, the courthouse steps were lined with people. Neighbors, reporters, cameras. I adjusted my tie, my reflection in the glass doors staring back at me. Not a father this time, not a victim, but a man ready to see justice carried out. Emma stood beside me, holding Lily close, the baby's small glasses barely staying on her tiny nose. The bailiff opened the doors, his voice echoing down the marble hallway. "All rise," and as those doors swung wide, the air seemed to shift. The trial of Margaret Sullivan had begun. The courthouse felt different when I wasn't the one on the bench. I'd spent years sitting behind the gavel, commanding silence, order, respect. But that day, I sat quietly in the gallery, watching someone else hold the power. Judge Patricia Williams had been assigned to the case, a seasoned jurist, sharp-minded, with the kind of authority that made even the most arrogant attorneys tread carefully. It comforted me knowing the trial would be in capable hands, but that didn't make it easier to sit and stay silent while my daughter's attacker smirked across the room. Margaret Sullivan looked the same as she had that morning. Rigid posture, gray suit pressed within an inch of its life, hair coiled in that severe bun that mirrored her personality, no hint of remorse, no trace of shame. Her expression was one of quiet confidence, as though she believed she was the victim of overreach rather than the perpetrator of assault. Beside her sat her attorney, Richard Morrison. If you've ever seen arrogance weaponized, you've seen Richard Morrison in court. Tall, slick, every word wrapped in fake charm and dripping with confidence. I'd seen him in my own courtroom many times, defending the indefensible. He had a knack for twisting facts until lies sounded like logic. And now, he was representing the woman who'd nearly blinded my daughter. He rose the moment the session began, buttoning his suit jacket with theatrical precision. "Your Honor," he said, voice smooth as polished glass, "we move for immediate dismissal of all charges against my client, Margaret Sullivan, on the grounds that she was acting within her legal authority as president of the Maple Ridge Estates Homeowners Association." The room erupted in a low murmur. I felt my blood boil. Acting within her authority? Judge Williams raised an eyebrow. "Go on, Mr. Morrison," he smiled. The kind of smile you only see on people who think they're the smartest in the room. The HOA bylaws clearly grant the president the right to enforce community regulations, including those regarding sidewalk obstructions and noise violations. My client observed such violations, attempted to address them, and was met with hostility. She used non-lethal means to de-escalate the situation. Across the aisle, Assistant District Attorney Jennifer Martinez stood, her jaw tightening. She was young, brilliant, and fearless. A prosecutor I'd seen dismantle defense strategies like a surgeon cutting out tumors. "Non-lethal means?" she said sharply. She sprayed chemical weapon-grade pepper spray into the face of a 3-week-old baby. Richard tilted his head. My client did not know there was an infant in the stroller. Jennifer didn't miss a beat. The baby was crying. The video captures it clearly. Your client looked directly at the stroller before spraying. Richard smirked, unfazed. And yet, my client maintains she was focused on the adult obstructing the sidewalk, not the contents of the stroller. This is a tragic misunderstanding, not a crime. Judge Williams leaned forward. "Mr. Morrison, are you suggesting that HOA bylaws give your client the right to use force against residents?" "Not force, Your Honor," he said, smiling again. "Authority. My client believes she was enforcing the rules necessary to preserve community order." Jennifer interjected, her voice hard as granite. "The defense is attempting to elevate a private association's bylaws above federal and state law. HOA regulations are civil agreements. They do not grant anyone the right to physically harm another person, much less a child. Judge Williams nodded slowly. That's correct. HOA bylaws cannot and will not supersede state or federal law. Her tone carried weight, finality. Continue. Richard wasn't finished. The HOA has an established policy, Rule 47, Section 3, prohibiting obstructions on sidewalks. My client was simply ensuring compliance. If she hadn't enforced that rule, she could have been accused of neglecting her duties. By whom? Jennifer asked incredulously. The HOA board she bullied into submission? A ripple of laughter passed through the spectators before the bailiff barked, "Order in the court." Richard's face tightened slightly. Your Honor, my client has dedicated years to maintaining safety and order in her community. This prosecution is an overreach, an attempt to criminalize leadership. Jennifer stepped forward, holding up a still frame from the security footage. Margaret's arm extended, pepper spray mid-burst, aimed squarely at the stroller. The image froze on the large monitor for everyone to see. That, she said, her voice steady, is not leadership. That's assault. Even Richard had to glance away. Margaret, however, didn't. She stared straight ahead, that same smug detachment in her eyes, as if she still believed she'd done nothing wrong. Judge Williams tapped her pen on the bench, the sound sharp in the heavy silence. I've heard enough, she said. Mr. Morrison, your argument rests on the assumption that private association authority can justify the use of chemical weapons against a citizen. That argument is not only absurd, it's dangerous. She lifted the gavel slightly. Your motion to dismiss is denied. Morrison opened his mouth to protest, but she cut him off. Save it for trial, counsel. The gavel came down hard, the echo ringing through the chamber like a thunderclap. Motion denied, Judge Williams said again, her voice like steel. Proceed to trial. Across the room, Margaret finally turned her head and smiled. That same cold, knowing smile she'd worn the day she attacked my daughter. And I realized then the fight was far from over. She wasn't afraid of losing. She still believed she was untouchable. The morning the trial began, the courthouse looked more like a media war zone than a place of law. News vans lined the street, camera crews jostled for position, and reporters shouted over one another, their microphones raised like weapons. HOA president on trial for pepper spraying newborn, read the headlines scrolling across every major network. Inside, the courtroom was packed, parents clutching their children's hands, veterans of HOA disputes, even activists holding signs that read "Justice for Lily." The air buzzed with tension and outrage. Emma and I sat in the front row, Lily asleep in her stroller beside us. She was almost 5 months old now, bigger, stronger, but the faint scars on her cheeks still whispered the story of what had happened. When the bailiff called, "All rise," the hum of voices fell into silence. Judge Williams entered, her robe billowing, her expression carved from stone. The prosecution table gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Jennifer Martinez stood ready, calm and composed, but with a fire in her eyes I'd rarely seen. When she addressed the jury, her voice carried the kind of conviction that silenced even the faint creak of benches. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began. On the morning of May 14th, a woman named Margaret Sullivan made a choice. She saw a young couple standing with their newborn baby. A family who had broken no law, harmed no one, obstructed nothing, and she decided that enforcing a rule mattered more than a human life. She stepped toward the monitor, the first slide appearing on the screen. A photo of Lily before the attack. Tiny, peaceful, swaddled in pink. "This is Lily Rhodes," Jennifer said softly. 3 weeks old. Healthy. Happy. Safe. The next slide hit like a gut punch. Lily in the hospital, her face swollen and red, tubes and sensors covering her skin. This is Lily 2 hours later. Blinded by pepper spray. Fighting for every breath because Margaret Sullivan valued power over compassion. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. I saw one juror raise a hand to her mouth. Another blink back tears. Even the court clerk's eyes glistened. Jennifer let the silence stretch, the image burning into everyone's mind before she continued. The defense will tell you this was an accident, that Margaret Sullivan didn't know there was a baby in that stroller. But you'll see the video, you'll hear her words, and you'll realize that this wasn't a mistake. It was a deliberate act. A choice made in arrogance and cruelty. She turned toward Margaret's table. This trial isn't just about a rule gone too far. It's about the abuse of power. About what happens when authority forgets its humanity. When she finished, even Judge Williams looked shaken. Jennifer returned to her seat, and all eyes turned to Richard Morrison. He stood slowly, buttoning his jacket with the precision of a man who believed he could talk his way out of anything. Members of the jury, he began smoothly, this case is not what it seems. My client, Mrs. Sullivan, has spent years keeping her community safe. On that morning, she encountered what she perceived as a threat, a volatile situation escalating in seconds. In fear for her safety, she acted instinctively to protect herself. Emma's hand clenched around mine. Fear for her safety? From a baby? Morrison continued, undeterred by the scoffs from the gallery. The stroller obstructed the sidewalk. The parents became hostile. My client, an older woman, feared physical harm. She used non-lethal means to create distance. A tragedy followed, yes, but it was never her intention to harm anyone. When he sat down, Jennifer rose again, her tone ice-cold. Non-lethal means? She echoed. Let's be clear. Pepper spray is a chemical weapon. Its use on an infant is not defensive. It's criminal. She stepped back to the monitor. And since Mr. Morrison mentioned perception, let's review exactly what Mrs. Sullivan saw that morning. She nodded to the technician in the corner. The lights dimmed. On the screen, the slow-motion footage began to play. Margaret's face, stern and furious, arm raising, the sharp burst of spray catching the sunlight before striking the stroller. The jury leaned forward, every breath in the room held captive, and as Lily's first scream echoed through the courtroom speakers, I saw the jurors' expressions harden from shock to fury. By the second day of the trial, the courtroom had shifted from tension to something heavier: grief, anger, disbelief. Every person seated there, from the jurors to the reporters, carried the weight of what they'd already seen. But nothing prepared anyone for what came next. The testimonies. When Emma took the stand, the entire room fell into absolute silence. She looked fragile under the harsh lights, her trembling hands clutching the edge of the witness box. Her voice cracked on the very first sentence. That morning, she began softly, I just wanted to take my baby for a walk. She described the moment Margaret approached, her tone calm but trembling beneath the surface. She started yelling about the stroller being on the sidewalk. I tried to tell her we'd move in just a second, but she wouldn't listen. Her voice, it was full of anger. Like we'd done something terrible. Emma's eyes filled with tears. Then I saw her reach into her purse. I didn't understand at first. I thought she was grabbing her phone again, but then, her breath caught and she pressed a hand to her chest as though trying to stop her heart from breaking. Then she sprayed it, straight at my baby's face, from 2 feet away. I heard the hiss, saw the mist hit Lily. She screamed, oh God. She screamed like I've never heard a human being scream. The courtroom was still, the air thick with emotion. Even Judge Williams seemed to blink back tears. What happened next, Mrs. Rhodes? Jennifer Martinez asked gently. I grabbed her, but I didn't know what to do, Emma said, her voice shaking. Her face turned red, and she couldn't breathe. Her lips turned blue. I thought she was dying in my arms. She looked toward the defense table then, her gaze sharp, trembling with fury. And she pointed at Margaret, walked away laughing. Gasps rippled through the gallery. One juror put a hand to her mouth. Another shook his head in disbelief. Richard Morrison rose for cross-examination but quickly realized there was no way to challenge raw truth. Emma's pain was its own testimony. He asked a few shallow questions. technicalities about timing and distance, but every answer cut deeper into his argument. When Emma stepped down, she didn't look at Margaret. She just returned to her seat beside me and held my hand like she was holding on to solid ground. Next, Dr. Patel took the stand. His tone was steady, professional, but the gravity in his words drew the same reaction as Emma's tears. When Lily was brought in, he said, she was in respiratory distress. Her oxygen levels were dangerously low. The pepper spray caused severe swelling in her airways, leading to partial suffocation. He paused, looking toward the jury. She almost didn't make it. If the ambulance had arrived even 2 minutes later, she might not have survived. A few jurors exchanged horrified looks. Even Morrison didn't take notes. Dr. Patel continued, explaining the corneal scarring, the risk of long-term respiratory sensitivity, the lasting trauma. His words were clinical, but each fact felt like a punch to the gut. Then came the psychologist, Dr. Green. Calm, compassionate, she explained what trauma looked like in an infant. At 3 weeks old, Lily's brain was forming its earliest associations. The pain she experienced has now been linked to certain stimuli, light, sound, even human faces. She displays fear responses to environments that remind her of that moment. In simple terms, her brain remembers terror before it remembers safety. Can this be treated? Jennifer asked. With time, therapy, and love, yes, Dr. Green said. But the scars may always be there. The jury sat frozen, the magnitude of what had been taken from a newborn baby dawning on them. But Jennifer wasn't finished. The prosecution calls 3 additional witnesses, she said, former students of the defendant from her time as a school principal. That's when the history of Margaret Sullivan came roaring out of the shadows. One by one, parents and now grown students took the stand, describing incidents buried 15 years deep. A mother's voice quavered as she recalled how Margaret once grabbed her 7-year-old son by the throat for running in the hallway. She said discipline required fear, the woman said, her knuckles white around the rail. Another woman testified that Margaret had locked her daughter in a supply closet for 2 hours for talking during assembly. She said she was teaching her respect. It was horrifying. The courtroom wasn't just seeing a woman who attacked a baby, they were seeing a lifelong abuser of power. Jennifer leaned into that truth during her questioning. These testimonies, she said, show a pattern, a repeated choice to inflict fear and pain on those weaker than herself. It was a textbook example of character evidence, the kind of testimony that establishes behavioral patterns relevant to intent. Margaret hadn't snapped. She had simply done what she'd always done, abused authority. Finally, Jennifer turned to the judge. The prosecution moves to admit Exhibit 47, interrogation footage from the defendant's arrest. The lights dimmed again. The screen flickered to life. Margaret sat in the gray interrogation room, her posture perfectly straight, her face expressionless. Detective Chin's voice played through the speakers. "You pepper-sprayed a 3-week-old baby." Margaret looked up slowly, her lips curling into that infuriating smirk. "I pepper-sprayed a violation," she said coldly. "The fact that it was a baby is irrelevant." The audio echoed through the courtroom. You could hear the air leave the room. And for the first time since the trial began, even Richard Morrison looked shaken. By the time the trial reached its final day, the courtroom no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt like a church. The air was thick with the kind of silence that only comes before something sacred or devastating. The evidence had been shown, the testimonies delivered, the video played over and over again until no one could forget that single image. Margaret Sullivan raising her hand and spraying poison into the face of a newborn child. Jennifer Martinez stood at the front, ready to give her closing argument. She didn't pace. She didn't raise her voice. She simply looked at the jury and spoke with a quiet fury that carried more weight than any shout ever could. "Ladies and gentlemen, you've seen the footage. You've heard the witnesses. You've listened to a mother describe the sound of her child screaming in agony. You've heard a doctor explain how close that child came to dying. This case isn't about a rule. It's about the moment when rules become excuses for cruelty." She gestured to the monitor behind her. On it appeared the same before and after photos of Lily, one peaceful, one ravaged by burns. This is what happens when power matters more than people, when rules matter more than life, when authority is twisted into a weapon. She paused, her gaze locking on the jury. Margaret Sullivan didn't make a mistake. She made a choice, a deliberate, calculated act of harm against a helpless child. And she did it with pride. She said she'd do it again. You have the power to tell her, and everyone like her, that power without humanity is not authority. It's evil. When Jennifer sat down, the room stayed silent for a long, trembling moment. Then Judge Williams turned to me. "Judge Rodas," she said softly, "with the prosecution's permission, I'll allow your brief statement as the victim's father." I stood, the weight of months pressing down on me. Every eye turned toward me, jurors, press, even Margaret. My voice, when it came, was low but steady. "Margaret Sullivan didn't just spray pepper spray at a stroller," I began. "She attacked innocence. She decided that an HOA rule was worth more than a baby's breath." I looked toward the jury, my throat tight. This is what happens when rules matter more than lives. When people hide behind titles and bylaws to justify their cruelty. I've spent years sitting on that bench. I pointed toward Judge Williams's seat, watching people use the law as a shield to escape accountability. But the law was never meant to protect the powerful. It was meant to protect the vulnerable. I looked at the photos of Lily one last time. My daughter will grow up with scars. She'll see the world differently, literally and figuratively. But she'll also grow up knowing that justice exists, and that's because of you. I nodded toward the jury. You have the power to make sure no one ever believes they can do what she did and walk away, smiling. When I sat down, you could have heard a pin drop. The only sound was the faint sniffling from the back rows. Even the court reporter wiped her eyes. Margaret stared straight ahead, her face expressionless, but her hands had begun to twitch slightly in her lap. Judge Williams gave the jury their final instructions, and they filed out to deliberate. The clock on the wall ticked louder than it should have, every second dragging like an eternity. Emma held my hand tightly, her thumb tracing the edge of my palm in nervous circles. 4 hours later, the bailiff called, "All rise." The jurors filed back in, their faces grave. My heart slammed in my chest. The foreperson stood. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Margaret Sullivan, guilty on all counts." For a brief second, the world froze. Then the air broke with the sound of someone gasping, someone sobbing, someone whispering, "Thank God." Margaret's composure shattered. Her lips trembled, her eyes darting wildly as the weight of the word guilty hit her like a physical blow. For the first time, she looked afraid, truly afraid. Judge Williams thanked the jury, set sentencing for 3 weeks later, and adjourned court. The gavel came down one final time, echoing through the silent room. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't felt since that morning on the sidewalk. Peace. Not total, not perfect, but the kind that comes when justice finally finds its mark. 3 weeks later, the courtroom was filled again, but this time the atmosphere was different. The rage and tension had softened into quiet anticipation. Justice was no longer a question. It was a promise waiting to be fulfilled. Emma stood at the front, Lily in her arms. Our daughter was 6 months old now, her face healed though faint scars traced across her cheeks like ghostly reminders of what had been done to her. Judge Williams invited Emma to deliver her victim impact statement. My wife's voice trembled at first but grew stronger with every word. "This is Lily," she said, holding our daughter a little higher. "She's 6 months old now. She's beautiful, strong, and alive. But she's also traumatized. She screams at loud noises. She flinches when strangers come near. And every night she wakes up crying from nightmares she can't even understand." Emma looked directly at Margaret. "You hurt a baby," and laughed. "You looked at my child and decided she was a violation, not a person. You robbed her of safety before she even learned what the word meant." The courtroom was silent except for Lily's soft breathing. Emma's voice broke, but she didn't stop. You can spend the rest of your life trying to justify it, but you'll never erase it. Every night when you close your eyes, I hope you hear her screams the way I still do." Judge Williams nodded slowly, her expression unreadable. Then she turned to Margaret, her tone hard as iron. "Mrs. Sullivan, I've presided over criminal cases for 2 decades. I've seen cruelty in many forms, but I've never seen someone harm a 3-week-old infant and show absolutely no remorse. You claim you were enforcing rules, but there is no rule, no law, no policy that justifies cruelty." She lifted the sentencing documents. For aggravated assault on a minor, 20 years. For child endangerment, 15 years. For assault with a chemical weapon, 10 years. Total, 45 years in state prison. You will be eligible for parole in 30. The room erupted in applause. Some stood, some cried. The entire community seemed to exhale at once, finally free of her shadow. As deputies cuffed Margaret, she glanced back at me, her face pale but defiant. "I was just enforcing rules," she whispered. And for the first time, I didn't respond, because now the law had spoken for me. 2 years later, our backyard looked like something out of a dream. Balloons floated in the soft spring air, sunlight filtered through the oak trees, and laughter echoed across the fence line. It was Lily's 2nd birthday, a celebration we once weren't sure we'd ever see. She ran barefoot across the grass, her tiny glasses slipping down her nose as she chased bubbles that shimmered like fragments of another world. The faint scars on her cheeks had faded, but every time I saw them, they reminded me how far she'd come. Emma sat on the porch, one hand resting on her growing belly. We were expecting again, a boy this time. I walked over and knelt beside her, watching as Lily squealed with joy when a butterfly landed on her hand. "She's fearless now," Emma said softly. 2 years ago, she screamed at sunlight. Now she's holding a butterfly. She's stronger than both of us, I said, smiling. But deep down, I knew that strength was born from what we'd all survived together. The neighborhood had changed too. Maple Ridge Estates no longer looked like the prison Margaret Sullivan built. The HOA had been completely restructured after her conviction. New leadership, new priorities. Ones that valued people before rules. The fences still stood straight, the lawns still green, but now, kids played on sidewalks without fear of citations. Dogs barked freely. Life had returned to the place where control once ruled. Sometimes I still thought about Margaret, sitting behind bars, counting down the years of her 45-year sentence. The woman who believed order was worth more than compassion, but I didn't think of her with anger anymore. Only pity. Because in the end, the one thing she'd never understand was that power doesn't come from control. It comes from love. Lily toddled over, holding up her tiny hands, her voice full of pride. "Dada, look!" The butterfly she'd been chasing spread its wings and lifted into the sky. Emma's eyes filled with tears. "She's free," she whispered. I wrapped my arms around them both and looked out at the sunlight dancing on the lawn. "Justice doesn't erase pain," I said quietly, "but it restores order. It gives you the chance to breathe again. So to everyone watching this, I'll ask you, what would you do if someone hurt your child in the name of rules? Smash like if you'd fight back. Comment your HOA horror stories below. She tried to break us, but we were unbreakable.